Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and today I thought I'd share with you a little comparison of the Dark Goddess Tarot new mass market edition to the now out of print indie edition. So we're going to take a look at the differences between the decks. The artwork has stayed the same as far as I know, but we're going to take a look at some of the production differences and some of the design aspects that are different between the two decks. So before we jump into the cards here and do a little side-by-side comparison, I do want to talk about some of the differences in terms of the production. Now, as you can see here, this is the new mass market edition box, and this is the indie edition box. Now, the indie edition box is nice. It was just, a basic slide top box. It didn't have the thumb hole, so it was a little hard to get in and out of, but it was a great little box that worked just fine. Let's talk about this box because this is the new box that is available, and I generally don't like to go into like packaging a ton on my channel because I really don't care about the box. I'm just gonna be perfectly honest. I really don't. I don't keep my decks in their boxes very often, but for the most part, like if it's in one of these giant boxes, I don't have space for this. I don't keep my boxes in this. This is, however, a very nice box. The main reason that I am pointing out this whole box issue is because before any of the images were released, one of the things that we all saw was the front of this box. And I really thought that, oh my gosh, these cards are going to be like completely borderless with just the artwork just right there, front and center and stunning. And that was what I thought, along with a couple other people that I know, thought that that's what the deck was going to look like. And it's not quite, it doesn't quite look like that. This is, however, a nice box. It's really big. It's the magnetic tuck box. They've added some nice detail on it. There's some nice text on the back. But one of the things that it's got a nice inside, and I am going to talk about this guidebook because the whole reason I bought this edition was to get this book, so I definitely want to talk about that. However, my box arrived like this. I hope you can see it. This was the plastic wrap that was supposed to be around the cards. It had totally busted. The cards were shoved down in the bottom. It had busted out the whole bottom, and I think the cards have survived fairly well intact, but this is a little bit of a disappointment. I don't store my cards in their boxes, so the fact that this box is no longer usable as a storage system for my deck really isn't a big deal because I don't store mine that way. But for somebody that they do store their decks this way, this does not work. I don't know what happened, but this just completely ripped and the cards were all in there and scattered everywhere. And I don't know what is going on with Schiffer in their boxes, but it's like always an issue. So that aside, I just want to point that out, that if you are somebody that keeps your decks in these big boxes, just be aware of that issue because this is how mine arrived. And so I just wanted to point that out. But really what I want to do is talk mostly about the artwork and the design aspects and do a flip through of this deck in case you haven't seen it. There have been a lot of flip throughs and walkthroughs and things of that nature, both with the indie edition and with the new mass market edition. So I don't want to go into too much detail, but I do want to show them to you in case that isn't something that you've seen. So on the left here, I have the indie edition, which has these beautiful scales on the back, this purple and blue. And I think that really fits the deck much better than this little design on the back of the mass market deck. It looks almost nautical to me, which really doesn't fit with the scope of this deck. That aside, I mean, it's fine. It's the back of the deck, so it's not really that big of a deal, but I did just want to point that out. I do much prefer the backs on the indie edition than the mass market edition. It feels more in line with the deck. So I did do a cursory look through the new deck just to mostly check to see if my cards were okay after they arrived in a big jumble. And as I was putting my indie edition back in order for this video, I was kind of checking out the cards just to make sure the artwork is the same. The artwork does appear the same throughout the entire deck. So there have been no changes to the artwork. The color is a little bit different just because, we're talking different printings. So I think the obvious that jumps out here is the titles. Now, again, I was really hoping based on what I had seen on the box, you can see it here on the book as well. I mean, these these look like borderless cards, and that's really what I thought this was going to be. So I was a little disappointed that it wasn't. It does have borders. It does have gold gilding. We'll talk about that in a minute because, you know, we know how I feel about that. But the obvious change is in the titles. And I have to say, I'm really disappointed by the titles on the new edition because they are, for one, look like cheap clip art, and two, the font and the texture, the combination between the font and the texture on the banner can make some of them really hard to read. And the biggest issue that I have with it is in a lot of the cards, it actually covers up some of the artwork. And I really dislike when deck creators do that or designers do that. Don't cover up the artwork unless you're going to work the title into the artwork. That's what I'm saying. The font on this particular deck is also, it's hard to read. It's really kind of thin and slanty, and it just, I don't know. It's hard on my eyes. I have a hard time reading it. And you can see that they have swapped it so the title of the card is down at the bottom and the Dark Goddess name is at the top now. Totally fine, but I would have preferred, if you're gonna do this with a border, I would have preferred the title or the name just be up at the top like it is here and not impeding on the artwork any. That's my biggest disappointment. The fact that I really thought it was going to be borderless based on what was on the box and the images that we saw from the get-go, and these things, these title banners at the top are just, I think, a really poor design choice, just in my personal opinion. But I did want to do a flip through. I wanted to share with you the images in case you hadn't seen it. So this is the Fool. And as I'm talking here, we'll go through and take a look. The artwork is, it looks to be roughly the same size. I think the artwork might be pretty much the same size as far as the art space on the indie edition versus the art space on the mass market edition, but the mass market edition is a little bit smaller. So it's a little bit thinner and a little bit shorter, just so you can see that there. Other than that, I mean, the colors look great on the new mass market edition. A little bit more saturated. I feel like the colors have been bumped up a little bit in this new edition. But I do think that it's beautifully printed in terms of that. The coating on the cardstock is different. This is a bit shinier. I have all the interior lights turned off so that hopefully it won't catch glare. The indie edition is has more of a coating on it than a gloss, if that makes sense. But as you can see, the artwork is completely the same. And I do have to say that this deck is definitely a favorite of mine, and it features very predominantly in my goddess work and my dark moon work. So I tend to use it very heavily for that kind of work in my practice. I do want to do a video on that at some point as well. But so this deck is very well used and very well loved in my collection. So you can see here where the title area just, I mean, it's kind of just impeding on Baba Yaga here. And it just feels a little bit crunched in, a little bit squished. So as we're just flipping through here, I mean, you can see that the colors are pretty good. I would say that the new edition it's like a bit more blue. The blue tones are a bit more blue, whereas in the indie edition, they're a bit more on the purpley side, which I actually kind of like, but that's just because I like purple. So, but the cards themselves are gorgeous. You can see here the banner again is going over the little moon. The moon on this card on the indie edition is a bit brighter than it is over here. So in some cases, the whites aren't as bright in the mass market edition. And again, that banner just over all that knotwork at the top. But again, a gorgeous deck. I mean, I don't want to harp too much on the details. If you don't have the indie edition, this is a perfectly wonderful, perfectly acceptable alternative because, for one, it's readily available. It was fairly inexpensive, and it comes with a fantastic guidebook, which we are going to talk about here in a minute because really that's what I'm looking for this particular deck. with the mass market edition. But I do want you to see that the artwork is completely the same. So now we're moving into, that was all the majors, now we're moving into the minors. And the artwork hasn't changed any, which I'm so happy about. This is the one card that really kind of bothers me, and probably because Hecate is really an integral part of my personal practice. And so the fact that the banner like pretty much is sitting on top of her head kind of bugs me. There's a little bit of a variation in color tone between these two. So, you know, minor changes that could be from a variety of things. That could be from the cardstock to the printing to the coding. The fact that these are older, these are newer. I mean, all kinds of things play into that particular area of things. But as you can see, that the artwork is the same, and I'm so happy about that, because this deck is foundational in my practice, and I really, really enjoy working with it. And I love Ellen Ramsey Prince's art. I have all of her decks except for the Tarot of the Crone. I'm still trying to get my hands on that one. I have heard a rumor that it's going to be released mass market, so hopefully that is true, so I can at least get my hands on it in that sense. I have a big mark down the middle of my card there. As you can tell, these cards have been well used, well loved. So just flipping through. Again, this is not like a super detailed flip through. Here we're moving into the suit of water. I love that this deck the suits are all elemental, which is really fabulous. And of course, if you just want to see the flip through and not listen to me ramble, you can always mute me. Totally cool with that. This is my favorite card in the deck. I don't know what it is about this card, but this card just speaks volumes to me. I love that card. So here's our 7. It's another one of my favorite cards. Again, you can see here that hopefully it will pick up on camera, but in person, it's very purple here and very blue here. Now in this particular card, I think the bluer tone actually works better with this particular card. I'd be curious to know which coloration is closer, because here we see in the 9 of water, they look really similar, but in Sedna here, this card definitely has a purple hue and this one definitely has a blue hue. So I wonder if that was fixed or adjusted on purpose, and I would be curious to know why that was, because some of them look really spot on, like these two here, the 10 of water, the color tones look really, really similar. So I also love the quartz in this deck. We have Amazons, Sirens, Witches for the queens, and Hags for the kings, which is fantastic. I love that. Of course, this is a very feminine deck because it's all about the dark goddesses. And I am personally doing some really deep dive work into dark goddess energy. So this deck has been featuring very prominently in my practice lately. Again, you can see some variations in color here. The sky looks more purple, looks more gray here. Just interesting. So anyway, I have some wonderful, been doing a lot of work with the Dark Goddess Tarot. And when I went back and forth about whether I was going to get the new edition, and then when I really stopped to look at the book, that was kind of what cinched it for me. Because I do have the PDF of the Dark Goddess Tarot from the indie edition. It does come with a little guidebook, which I'll show you too. But I also purchased the PDF version of the book, and I do have it on my computer, but I don't tend to use it just because it's kind of hard for me to use. I don't read where my computer is, so I'd have to actually print it, and I just haven't done that yet. So for me, it was totally worth the money to get the guidebook. That was really what I was after. But now that I have 2 copies of this deck, you know, I'm already kind of going through in my mind, what could I do with my second copy? Because I do love this deck. It is a favorite in my collection, and I am looking forward to maybe doing something crafty or possibly trimming the new one down. I've kind of always had the urge to trim this down, although I wouldn't have a clue who most of these people are if I take the names off. But I have the big guidebook now. I have a, intact version of the deck, so I probably could. So again, just a real quick side-by-side comparison because, as I said, nothing has changed in terms of the artwork. The base artwork hasn't changed. It's really just the structure of the deck and the size, the structure, and the outer design. I really don't mind the borders, and I don't even mind that it has the border within the border. I'm just not fond of the font here, and I'm not fond of this clip art banner. I would have just preferred the text at the top, mostly because between the font and the texture on the banner, some of them are really hard for me to read. So that's my really nitpicky thing there. Again, I think the backs are much better on the indie edition, but because they just have a nautical feel for me on this one, which doesn't really fit. But I suppose you could see that this kind of has a nautical feel, right? It could be a fish, but I think of it more as a serpent in terms of Dark Goddess. So that's just my personal thing there. So now that we have taken a look at the cards side by side, and you've had a chance to look at those if you hadn't before, of course this deck does have that cheap shiny gold gilding, which I really wish would just go away because it hurts my hands and I don't like it. Cardstock, it is like we're back to shiny cardstock for Schiffer. Let me turn the light on. Can you see that? Can you see that reflection? Apologize, let me turn it back off because that's just annoying. But we're back to the shiny cardstock with Schiffer, and which is interesting because the Star Tarot that I have that recently came out, that one has matte cardstock, right? So I don't know why some are shiny and why some are matte, or I'm not sure what the deal is. So shuffling. Here we go again. I can't with this deck. Trying to get my hands around it because it's bigger than a standard tarot. It just can't really get my hands around it to riffle shuffle it. Because it is, glossy and it's kind of slippery, it does overhand well enough. So that's nice in that respect, I guess. Being that I have the indie edition, I probably won't be using this one for readings unless I'm going to trim it down. I would need to take the gilding off because it's hurting my hands. I can't quite get my hands around it. So this is the Robin Wood, which is a Llewellyn deck. So you can see, maybe if I go this way, that the Dark Goddess is a little bit wider, a little bit taller. So this right here, this gorgeous guidebook was the whole reason, the entire reason I bought the mass market edition, was because I absolutely love this edition of my deck, the indie edition, but as I mentioned, it only comes with a PDF. It doesn't come with it. The PDF was sold separately. I had to buy it. And it was just hard to work with. And the indie edition has this little white book, which is actually fantastic. I really, really love this white book because it has just a simple key phrase and then like one oracle message, and it's just really powerful, and it's really for the most part all that you need to work with this deck. It actually works beautifully. But I was really excited to get the larger guidebook and to dive into more of the story. I do try to use the PDF when I can, but like I said, it's more difficult. So I'm really excited to be able to have this book to work with. So just flipping through here, we have the contents. We have, looks like a list of the majors, which is really nice. A list, kind of key phrase for the associations. We have Amazon for the page, Siren for the knight, witch for the queen, and hag for the king. A little bit about working with the goddess. And then we go into the major arcana, and look at this with this big, beautiful imagery here. I love this. The book is also very nicely produced. And I'm just curious, because the book was the whole reason I bought this deck, if what's written on here, I don't have the PDF at hand to tell it, but I'm just curious. The little key phrases are the same. So for Fool, we have British Spirit of Morning and Invitation, perfect there. And then we have the little Oracle message, Dare to come back to where you began. So that's great. I'm really glad that they included that in here, because that is really something that I use and I tie into my work with this deck. But what I'm really excited about is all the different additional information. So we have a little bit about the Dark Goddess, and then we have what would be, I assume, the Oracle message here. And it looks like we have a page for all of the majors. Love this Empress card. It's one of my favorites in the deck too. So this is a beautifully produced book, and it looks like we have the same amount for the minors, which is fantastic. I love when there is the same amount of information between the minors and the majors. A lot of times in guidebooks, the minors just don't get the same amount of love, and I feel like they're a really important part of the deck. They are the bulk of the deck, and so I love that the minors have the same amount of information. So this right here, this for me was totally worth buying the mass market deck. Like, even if I were never to touch the cards, it would be totally worth it just to have this guidebook. And I love how all these pages are black and all these pages are white. That is awesome. So beautifully, beautifully produced book. There was a bit I wanted to look in the back of, I thought I saw, I love this card too. It looks like it's stitch bound too, which is awesome. Okay, so we have Dark Goddess Tarot spreads in the back here. That is really cool. So we have a Substance and Shadow, 2-card spread, a what, why, and how, 3-card spread, and the Goddess Be With You, which looks like a 5-card spread. So I'm gonna have to try those, because those are new for me. So here is a little bit about the creator's journey of the Dark Goddess. So here we have a little bit of the author's personal journey with the Dark Goddess Tarot, and of course a little picture of her and a little bit about the author herself, Ellen Lorenzi Prince. So I do have to say, and let's just kind of take a flip through the cards as I'm kind of sitting here rambling, that I am so glad that this deck was actually picked up mass market. I am a huge fan of Ellen Lorenzi Prince's work. There is something just really raw and honest and primal in her artwork. There is something very real in her tarot decks, and every deck that I have of hers really dives deep into its subject matter. It really gets to not only the heart of whatever it is you're trying to uncover in your reading, but really I feel like it really taps into the energy and the history and the legacy and the myth and the legend of whatever it is that she's depicting. So in this particular deck, we have Dark Goddesses, and it feels very much like these images really tap into the energy of the goddess themselves, and they feel like it just pulls that energy out. It really evokes it, really brings it to the forefront. So while of course there are some design changes in terms of the production of the deck and all of that from the indie edition, you know, just little variances of personal preference. You know, I might like the backs better on the indie edition, but I like the availability and this gorgeous book that comes with the mass market. So I'm really glad that this deck has been brought out of that sort of limited, just a handful of people have it, to put it in the hands of anybody who wants access to it. I think that's really wonderful. I love that some of the publishers are starting to pick up these indie decks. They're kind of giving us a lot of different avenues to explore, a lot of different types of decks to explore. And I think that that's really wonderful. And taking something that for a long time was very hard for anybody to get, to explore, to dive into, to really be able to even purchase and bring into their collection, and to allow it to become, this mass-produced product, and to get it out there into the hands of the rest of the world, I think is really fantastic. I'm so happy to see that some of the publishers are starting to do that, and I'm really glad that this is one of them. So overall, I'm actually really thrilled to have this in my collection. If I didn't have this, if I had never gotten a copy of the indie edition, I would be perfectly happy with this deck the way it is. I mean, it's gilded. Knowing me, I'd probably take the gilding off, right? Because that's what I do, because I don't like gilding. But besides that, it would totally work for me. I love that none of the artwork has been changed. I love that the energy, the underlying energy, is still there. And that, I think, is the most important part. The little production things aside, the borders, the gilding, the titles, all that aside, what really matters is that the intention and the energy is still there. And I think it very much is with this deck. So I do think the mass market deck is a beautiful deck all in its own right. I mean, my personal preferences aside, I'm not thrilled with the banners and I don't like the gilding. All of that aside, that's just my little own personal nitpicky stuff. I think this is a gorgeous deck, and I really am pleased to have it. I think that it's going to be a beautiful addition to my collection. I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do with it yet, but I'm definitely going to incorporate it somehow because I absolutely adore this deck. I love the artwork, and it's been a huge tool in my own personal practice. And like I said, I'm really excited to have this guidebook because that was the main reason that I purchased the deck. But I think that it's a beautiful product all in its own right. And I don't want to discount it in any way, shape, or form by comparing it to the indie edition. I just wanted you to see that the artwork is the same. Only a few design changes have happened in terms of, borders and banners. The rest of it is entirely the same. It retains the energy, it retains the intention, and I think that is the most important part. It is a beautiful deck. I think the mass market edition really did come out quite well. My own just personal nitpicky stuff aside, it's a gorgeous deck. So I hope you enjoyed this look at the mass market edition of the Dark Goddess Tarot. We did do a little comparison to the indie edition, but I do have to say that I really think that this is a beautiful set and I definitely recommend it. Thank you for joining me today. You will find links for the decks featured here in the description box below. I hope you enjoyed this video and will join me again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.